Call for the weeping mothers, the lost fathers, and the forsaken children, and let them come quickly.
Welcome, listeners, to Time for an Awakening on Black Talk Radio Network, new media for the new millennia. This is a history and current events program from a cultural perspective. We find this program necessary because Hosea 4:6 states, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." But we as a people can turn this around. Proverbs 4:7 states, "Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom. And with all that getting, get an understanding." Again, welcome to the program this evening with your host, Brother Elliott, Brother Reggie, and Brother Ralph. For the second half of the program, Brother Akua is going to put on his second hat. He's a Christian minister who has been in the ministry for over 17 years, and his book, The African Origins of Our Faith, is opening a lot of eyes and prompting serious dialogue in the faith-based community. And we want to continue that dialogue tonight with Brother Akua. Brother Akua.
Yes, sir.
How are you, sir?
Brother, I am blessed. I'm blessed. How are you today?
I'm doing great. You know, I didn't know it till after we were off the air last week that Brother Red said one of the Afrocentric charter schools that put on a play based on one of your books, which is great because the children at the one school that he's referring to are very ingenuity. They're very creative, and you know, we've had them on several of our programs because of the oratorical competition they have. Well, not competition, but oratorical contest, and we've always had the winners on our program. So I kind of have firsthand knowledge of the educational level and the dedication that the staff and the faculty have towards the students. So when he told me that they put on a play, I know they did a good job.
Oh, absolutely. And for that, we have to thank one of the parents who caught the vision. Her name is Sister Danielle Sellers. And she read my book, A Treasure Within.
That's exactly it. That's it.
Yeah, she was transformed by it and said, we have to bring this to our students and help them to have this experience and create this experience for a wider audience. And she just took it to a whole other level. And so I'm very thankful for the work that she did with them. Again, her name is Danielle Sellers.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Brother Akua, tonight we're going to do part 2 of our program. And I wanted to... last week I didn't want to rush into it because I wanted you to spend time talking about the education of our youth, and now we're going to transition over to talk more about the education of our adults, so to speak, because I think they can guide the youth into the subject matter that we're dealing with. Before we talk about the genesis of the African origin of our faith, I want to mention something that might kind of segue into it. You know, anytime we turn on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, other programs of that nature, when they're talking about religious documentaries, and even this past spring, you had 2 movies that hit mainstream theaters. One of them was The Son of God, and the other one was called Noah. And in both of the DVDs, especially, not DVDs, I'm sorry, both of the motion pictures, from what I understand, I didn't see either, but both of the motion pictures, especially the one Noah, had no people of color, no African Americans in the DVD at all. And we see this still happening here in 2014 when there's tons of primary evidence to show the contrary. Let's talk about, Brother Akua, what inspired you to write The African Origins of Our Faith?
Well, what inspired me to write The African Origins of Our Faith is that I found that as a people, we were decentered, in a sense, away from our strength as a people. And part of where our power can be found is being centered in our culture, in our history, and in our spirituality. A lot of people aren't aware of the incredible legacy of spiritual power and spiritual teachings that we gave to the world. But when we consider, movies like The Son of God and Noah, it's like this program that must be put out to reaffirm the non-Africanness of these ancient, biblical figures. And so going all the way back to, to the 50s and so forth with Charlton Heston and Ten Commandments and movies like that, where they portray these ancient Africans as Europeans, it's like every 5 to 10 years, they have to reboot the program to convince the public that, these were Europeans rather than the African people that they were. So what inspired me to write African Origins of Our Faith was really an opportunity to re-educate our people about not only our place in history, but our place in terms of spirituality. At the time that I wrote it, I was a minister serving out of a church where I taught a class called The African Origins of Our Faith. Prior to that, it was called Afrocentric Christianity. And I remember when I would teach that class, I would mention to people that almost all of the elements of the Bible and many of the stories can be traced back to ancient African sacred writings. And because I had kind of built a rapport and a relationship with the people in the class, they knew I wouldn't just say things like that. But at the same time, when I would say it, I could tell or sense in their energy and in their spirit they wanted more. And so that's what prompted me to write the book. I took 25 ancient African writings or scriptures, and I put them side by side with biblical writings that are saying the exact same thing or something very similar. But of course, these ancient African scriptures predate the Bible by over 1,000 years. And so I wanted people to see the similarities. And then in the second chapter, I talk about how these spiritual concepts evolved and were changed over time for cultural, political, and economic reasons. And then in the third chapter, I give a commentary on the truth about our transcendent identity, that we are, in fact, very, very powerful spiritual beings who have been sent here for a powerful purpose and for a mighty mission, to bring about the transformation and resurrection of African people and the redemption of humanity. So that's kind of what inspired me to write it.
We've had, over the years, we've had several of our scholars come on the program, and you join the list of them that talk about the African origin of spirituality. We've had men like Ashra Kwesi and Runoko Rashidi talk about the African origin of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Mm-hmm. Talk about why some people consider this topic, especially our people. When you bring this up, they consider it controversial or they don't want to touch it. And I know that you're a minister, so I know that you've run into it. What makes this controversial to a lot of our people?
Well, we've been very skillfully programmed to resist all things African and to resist all things black. That was part of the slave-making process. That's okay. Part of the process of keeping people as second-class citizens is you have to convince them that they're inferior and that anything that comes out of their cultural tradition is inferior and that the ways of the oppressor are superior, be that their science, be that their technology, their religion and spirituality, whatever it is that the oppressor is doing, it is a part of the process of oppression is to convince those that you're attempting to oppress that their culture and all of its manifestations are inferior. And so we put up this guard, and then when it comes to spirituality, we know that there are those that studied us very carefully, Brother Elliott. This is something that we really need to understand, because there are people who have studied us more carefully than we've studied ourselves. And one of the conclusions that they came to in their scientific studies of African people is that we are a deeply spiritual people. Now, in fact, one of the ancient names of Africa is Al-Kibulan, land of the spirit people. So they understood that we were spiritually centered in everything that we did. We brought spirit to science. We brought spirit to mathematics. We brought spirit to medicine, reading, writing, language, literature, agriculture, architecture, astronomy. Everything that we did had a spiritual element. And then we were thrust into a society and a system that attempted to despiritualize everything that we did. So they studied us very, very carefully. And so what they did was they used our spirituality against us, okay? the way that Tony Browder explains it, he says that they sent in the missionaries first to soften the hearts of the people because they knew we were very spiritual people. Sent in the missionaries to Africa first, the European missionaries. And then I would like to add that they sent in the merchants. The merchants controlled the economy and controlled the money. They sent in the missionaries to soften the hearts of the people. They sent in the merchants to control the economy and the money, and then they sent in the mercenaries, and the mercenaries are the soldiers of fortune that would come to rule and to ruin and to destroy. So when you look at that, and then you consider the powerful words that were uttered about how they used our religion against us. Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, says, when the Europeans sent their missionaries in, we had the land and they had the Bible. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. And when we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible. I'm going to say that again in case some of you listeners didn't catch that. He said when the European missionaries came in, they taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When they came in, we had the land, they had the Bible. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible. And so when you allow people to spiritually manipulate you like that, you can pray all you want to. But until you understand the mechanisms of the manipulation, until you understand the dynamics of oppression and the dynamics of domination, you're going to have some serious problems.
Brother Akua, now, I want to travel this path and I want to take it slow because I think that our people that are sincere, because a lot of our people, especially here in the diaspora, are operating solely on faith. When you try to talk about any primary evidence, it's always a resistance. It doesn't matter. God loves everybody, things of that nature. But when you talk about these things, especially myself, I don't talk about them from a hate other people perspective. I try to talk about it from the truth of the matter. Now, I'm no scholar. I just pride myself in trying to read and understand. But I want to do a little genealogy, and you correct me if I'm wrong, and because I want to get back to a point I'm trying to raise from this. If you look at the three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, if you do a sort of like a spiritual DNA, so to speak, you see that Islam came along in 630-something A.D. by Muhammad. And if you look at the writings in the Quran, they're closely based on the Bible. If you follow that back, you see that the Bible as we know it is based off of the Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures. And I'm not talking about Jewish. I'm talking about ancient Hebrew scriptures, even Judaism. But if you look back at the ancient Hebrew scriptures, and a lot of our people, believe me, you know this better than me, a lot of our people stop at the Greek translation of the Bible. That's where their faith lies. If you look back and take it from the Hebrew Bible, that was based, from my estimation, off of scriptures that you're talking about, which is the coming forth by day and by night. I want you to expand on that and correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, no, brother, you're right on it. No correction necessary. What I would like to do is see if I can put it in terms that the average everyday person can understand.
I want you to, yes.
Just if we're using the example of the Bible, we know the Bible is broken up into the Old Testament and the New Testament. And in order to fully understand the New Testament, it is important to read the Old Testament because the New Testament makes reference after reference to the Old Testament. Even a lot of the words that Jesus speaks, Yeshua, I would like to use his original name. Yeshua is the original Hebrew name. Jesus is a Greek name, and he was not Greek. So if you look at even the words of Yeshua, a lot of times he's making reference to things that are written in the Old Testament or in the law, as he often says. And so if you need the Old Testament to understand the New Testament, my contention is that in order to understand both of those testaments, you must understand the original testament. And the original testament is that you mentioned, which is the book of Coming Forth by Day, misnamed the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The original name in the original language, which we call Medu Neter, is called Pert Imheru. Again, that means the Book of Coming Forth by Day. So when you begin to read some of those ancient scriptures, and like I said, put them right alongside the biblical scriptures that are saying the same thing, as I do in my book, The African Origins of Our Faith, then you begin to see not only some striking similarities, but you begin to see that, wait a minute, that the Bible itself is not a new and original book that just fell from heaven. It is a book that has been tampered with, revised, changed over time for cultural, political, and economic reasons. And now, having said that, I want to be very clear that for me personally, the truth is still there, even though it's been tampered with.
Okay.
Even though it has been used as a tool and a weapon of oppression, the truth is still there and can be lifted out of it and illuminated for our people.
Okay.
But it depends on the lenses that are used to read and interpret it. Because when we were given that book in the American context of slavery, of Ma'afa, of the great suffering of our people, when we were handed that book, we were also handed the lenses through which we would read it. And that is why many of us, if we were to go, back in the closet or, on the bookshelf or into our parents' or grandparents' house, we would have this book that has a picture of a whole bunch of white folks in it, every few pages of this old family Bible or something. And so it's very, very important that we understand that it is as much our book as any other, cover to cover. And when we look at African spirituality, I definitely believe, because I know some people who they don't want to have anything to do with the Bible. When they kind of come into African consciousness, they're like, no, that was used to oppress us. My contention is it is just as valid as any other spiritual tradition, be it the ancient Kemetic tradition, be it Yoruba or Ifa, or any other traditional African spirituality. So that's kind of my perspective on that.
Before I turn things over to Brother Reggie, Brother Ralph, and get them involved in this conversation, because Brother Ralph told me that he picked up the book and the DVD and spoke with you earlier in the week. I know he got some things he wanted to jump in this conversation with. Let me, because we got a caller coming in. Let me take this call before I go to some of the things. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Yes, Brother Timothy, South Philly.
How are you? How are you, sir?
Very good, very, very good. Very interesting conversation, as a matter of fact. And I'm going to say...
We got a little interference in the background. If you can turn it down, if that's you.
Okay, sure. I'm going to say that in studying the Medu Neter, which is in my home, and looking at what I know as the Bible and Quran, from Abraham to Moses, from Moses to Jesus, 2,000 years ago, or if people want to add to that, Muhammad, 1,400 years ago, I'm stating that how much authenticism is in any of those books besides the Medu Neter, and what lens should we look through to sift through the truth? These characters, are they original, not original? Was this history written and then we lived it, or did it actually happen? Because I know this, I heard Stevie Wonder say, if we believe in things that we don't understand, then we suffer. So to come about the truth and have a better understanding, I think will prepare us for what the future is going to bring. Even though those books are written in the past. If a man writes his history and lives it.
Well, let's get some answers, and thank you for your call, Brother Timothy.
Yes, sir.
Brother Akua?
Yes, Brother Timothy, thank you so much for your question. It's funny that you asked that, and I don't think it's by chance that your name is Timothy, because in the book of 2 Timothy, it says, study to show yourself approved. And so I really appreciate your comment, because now what we have to do is look at a couple dynamics going on here. First of all, spirituality versus religion, and history versus mythology.
Well, okay? Wait a minute, Brother Akua. Is there a difference? Spirituality and religion?
Absolutely. We're going to start with that.
Okay.
We're going to start with that. And keep in mind, as I share this with you, these are just my definitions based on my research. So, people may have different definitions, but it's based on my research and kind of my opinion based on my research. For me, spirituality is God-given. Religion is man-made. Okay, so we didn't come here with religion, but we came into this world with spirituality. It is our beingness. It is the essence of who we are. Okay, but religion, for me, I define it as man's best and worst attempts to come to know God. Again, I define religion as man's best and worst attempts to come to know God. I say man because it is primarily a male-dominated pursuit, even though early on it was the woman who was elevated and celebrated and seen as the divine in many cases. But once certain forces and factors came into being, the divine feminine was replaced by a white male-dominated image of God. Okay, so that's why I say it's man's best and worst attempt. I say best attempt because there are some significant things in religion in terms of structuring and ordering things and putting certain rituals in place. Those things are good, and I think or can be good, but they can also be incarcerating if we're not careful. You have some people say, well, I don't believe in organized religion. And I used to be one of those people. But I think it's important to look at the opposite. Well, you believe in unorganized religion or what, So religion in and of itself is not necessarily evil. I say it's man's best and worst attempt. Worst attempt to come to know God? Dr. John Henry Clark said, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are nothing but male chauvinist murder cults. Now, if you studied history, the history of these religions, then you have no argument for Dr. Clark, because he's absolutely right. What has been done in the name of the divine, what has been done in the name of Jehovah, what has been done in the name of Yahweh, what has been done in the name of Jesus, what has been done in the name of Islam and in the name of Muhammad is absolutely reprehensible in terms of the atrocities and crimes against humanity. Okay? So that's the difference between spirituality and religion. Okay? So, religion can be very, very problematic. But we don't necessarily have to throw it out, because here's what I've noticed, Brother Elliott. I've noticed some people that have more of an elevated or liberated perception of spirituality sometimes have challenges being rooted and grounded. And by that I mean they're everywhere. They're all over the place in terms of their spiritual walk, and don't have kind of a focus. But then you have some people who are heavily into religion who are too narrow-minded and who can't see beyond the barriers of their own particular religious training.
Okay.
So there has to be, what we would say in ancient Kemet, there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance between the two. Yes, we want to be rooted and grounded in good teaching and strong doctrine, but we also want to not have a closed mind. We want to be open to the higher possibilities of our humanity and our divinity. So that's that whole dynamic between spirituality and religion. When it comes to history versus mythology, most people, or a lot of people, when they're reading the scriptures, in particular the Bible, they're viewing it as straight history. That yes, it's that yes, it's a religious book and a spiritual book, but they're viewing everything that they read as literal history. And that can be problematic because I don't believe that it was written to be interpreted that way. Yes, there are some things in there that are historical and can be verified, and there are other things that were perhaps meant to be metaphorical and metaphysical and interpreted rather than to be just believed on a straight historical. So that's like between history and mythology.
Let me grab this call. Caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, my name is Renee. I'm calling from Kansas.
How are you, Renee?
I'm fine, thank you. Greetings to your guests and to your other staff. I'd like to ask a question of the guests. In traditional African culture, do people believe in a God, or was it just more of a spiritual thing, like associated with the ancestors and the people that have passed on recently?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you, Sister Renee. So I'm feeling the spirit of my grandmother right now when you said you're calling from Kansas, because my grandmother's from Kansas City, and I received my first Bible from her, and it was she that said that she taught us that no man is truly educated unless he knows the Bible, and I took that seriously. And when I started digging into it, I ran right into our ancestors. So when we talk about traditional African spirituality, yes, they absolutely had belief in the one Most High, okay? And this is a point, and this is why it's so important that we have to be careful of who we allow to teach us about our history and our spirituality. As Du Bois said, we're looking at ourselves through the eyes of those that hated us.
Okay.
Because they told us that we were pagan. They told us that we were polytheistic. They told us that we were ungodly. They told us that we were barbarians. And what we didn't realize is that the real people who were ungodly were the people who were teaching us. The real people who were pagan and polytheistic were the ones who were telling us that we were pagan and polytheistic. The real barbarians were the ones that were telling us that we were barbarians. The real minority is the one that told us that we were a minority. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very, very important that you understand that when we go back into traditional African spirituality, we always had a belief in the one. However, in many cases, we understood that the one had many and multiple manifestations. And this, for some people, can be problematic because, again, they have not understood. We've been educated away from and educated against our own traditional ways. So we always understood that there was one, but that it had multiple and myriad manifestations. Now, I can go through both Bible and Quran and show you how that concept of the one with multiple and myriad manifestations is throughout. We can start with the Bible. If you look in the Bible, we know that there are a number of different names for the Most High. And I'll give you a quick example. We have Jehovah, meaning I am, the forever existing one. The first name for the Most High in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, is Elohim. That is the powerful ones. Then you have the Jehovah names, Jehovah Jireh, God who provides. You have Jehovah Nissi, Lord my banner. Jehovah Shalom, Lord our peace. Jehovah Shammah, God is present. Jehovah Sikkenu, God our righteousness. You have all these different names for the Most High. These are not separate gods. These are separate names talking about the attributes of God. Okay? When we go into the Quran, there are what's called the 99 names of Allah. Well, these 99 names are just that. They're names talking about the attributes of the Most High, not 99 separate gods. So, for example, in the opening of the Al-Fatiha, the prayer, they said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent and the Merciful. Rahman, beneficent, Rahim, merciful. And then, so you have the masculine and feminine of each of those and the other 97 names of Allah. Well, let's take it back thousands of years before both Christianity and Islam. When we go into the Nile Valley of Africa, you have Ra, you have Amin, you have Amun, you have Amun-Ra, you have Ptah. Again, you've got all these names, but now all of a sudden when we go into the traditional African spirituality, people say, see all those names? See, I told you they were polytheistic, right? They worship many gods. No. We had an understanding that there was one Most High with multiple manifestations. And each of those manifestations tells us something about the character and the quality and the power of the Most High. And so if you called on a particular name, you were calling on that particular attribute that you needed at that particular time. So if we were to call on, for example, if we were to call on Jehovah Jireh, God our provider, when we're in a bind and we need, financial providence, then we're calling on that part of the character of the Most High that will provide what we need. If we have a illness or disease in our body temple, then we will call on Jehovah Rapha, which means Lord our healer. So again, we can go into Bible and Quran, in the so-called monotheistic religions, and we can see examples of these multiple manifestations of the Most High. So I hope that answers your question.
Do you have another one, Renee? Renee, you still there? Let's move to the next caller. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Calling from Baltimore, Maryland. How are you today? How is the guest?
How are you? Would you say your name was Karen?
No, it's Amir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have a very, I've been thinking about this for a while because sometimes I watch, and listen to Dr. Ben, Sophie Carmichael and people that have a lot of intellect. And they're very useful for me in terms of me developing myself as an African. But where I differ from them is them talking about there's no God or, believe or saying that they're an atheist. How do you, having studied spirituality, contend with that? Because I cannot reconcile with that as a person who is a very spiritual person. I cannot reconcile with someone, saying that there's no God and being of African descent, and having that much intellect. I mean, it would just seem, it takes a lot of belief to not believe, in a God when you see all this around you. So people like that, how do you, as the author of the book, and the study of your, and when you gathered your work, how do you contend with that?
Well, I really appreciate your question, sister, and I think that's a powerful statement when you say it takes a lot of belief not to believe. When we look at this dynamic between intellect and intuition, I'll say, to get to the higher levels of spirituality, it cannot be arrived at intellectually from my perspective. Now, I want to be very clear. That doesn't mean throw reason out the window. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't study to show yourself approved. That doesn't mean that there's nothing to be found in the books. We already said before, it says, study to show yourself approved. So I believe that, we were given a mind and a brain for a reason, and that we should use our intellect and reason. However, I believe to tap into our most authentic power, it requires us to go to develop our intellect and to develop our reasoning capacities and faculties, and then to move significantly beyond it. Because what I'm referring to in terms of tuning in and tapping into this higher power, it's not something that can be so much as explained as it must be experienced. And therefore, you can't intellectualize it and so forth. You have to go into an experiential mode. And so if you're not careful, because, once again, because of how religion was used against us, then you have some who are ready to throw it out the window because of its devastating impact on us as a people. And I think we have to be very careful about that. Many of the African-centered scholars that I've studied, many of them still maintain a belief in and an understanding of the one Most High, but they've chosen their own particular path on how they're going to pursue that. So yeah, I don't believe that the highest forms of spirituality can be arrived at intellectually. We have to go significantly beyond the prescriptions of this world to reach it.
Any other questions, Amir?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all gets back to, how I just, it's just a comment, I guess, before I let you go, about how I just have not been able to, accept that. I mean, I've tried to listen, with a clear head, like to Dr. Ben, because he's very relevant to me. But it also confuses me. Well, I'm not confused anymore because I have evolved myself. It's not just what, you're saying, even though what you're saying parallels with what I feel. It's very deep, it's been a deep process for me to hold on to my own concept of God and my own beliefs, because when I do go to the Bible, I find relief in the words of so-called, the Greek, it's not, like you said, Jesus or Yeshua. I find relief in that, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I find relief? How can I find comfort? How can I find that these things maintain, are true? Like the scriptures, when you use them and when you study them, how come for me in my life they are true? If there is no God or if there's no history to this. I mean, I don't, have you studied that in terms of the history of, I guess you went to certain writings, like you were saying, Egyptian scriptures, and a lot of the scholars have said that, I guess whoever packaged the Bible, I guess you would say, took part of an African story, in other words, and, made it into, made up Jesus. Do you find that Yeshua being Jesus is a real figure, or do you think this is based on a story?
Thank you for your call, Amir, and don't be a stranger.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for your question again. I believe that the reason that when you read the biblical scriptures, why you find relief in them and why it kind of speaks to you and nourishes your soul is because there are universal truths there. And when there are universal truths there, it does not necessarily matter what your background is and things of that nature. It's how those truths are used. And so we talked about, how some of those things have been used to oppress us. But it's good that, when you read that, you find release and that your spirit is fed. When you asked about the authenticity of some of the biblical characters, such as Yeshua, what I look at for the most part is what the characters represent. Okay. So for me, Yeshua represents transformation, represents the perfect example of who and what we are to become. Because when we look at the origins of the word Christ, it goes back to the Gnostic word charast. Let me take it forward again. If you ask most ministers, where does the word Christ come from and what does it mean, they will tell you it comes from the Greek word Christos, which means the anointed one. Well, that's not incorrect, but it is incomplete. And in addition, is woefully insufficient because, again, Yeshua was not Greek, so we can't stop there. So, yes, it comes from the Greek word Christos, which means the anointed one, but the Greek word Christos comes from the word charast, which comes from the Kemetic word ka, meaning spirit. So what is the charast? What is this? Well, it wasn't a person. It was a principle. And so the charast, so the ka, that is the person who's raised up and resurrected, consciously connected with their Creator. One more time. One who was raised up, resurrected, consciously connected with their Creator. So everything we see Yeshua do in the Scriptures, we are supposed to do. And it's funny when we bring this to people's attention, the first thing people will do is try to talk you down to tell you, no, we don't have that capacity. And then the first thing they want to say is, okay, well, if we're supposed to do that, well, let me see you walk on water. Well, guess what? I'm not at that level of initiation yet. Let me just put that out there. But what I stand on, based on my reading and interpretation of the life of Yeshua, is that everything that he pointed to is that we are supposed to come into the same knowledge that he did and the same power that he did. And he even said, greater things shall you do because I go unto my Father who is in heaven. In other words, I'm leaving, but I'm also leaving you with the same power and authority that I had to heal the blind, to give sight to the blind, to heal the sick, to cure the lepers, to set the captives free, to feed the multitudes, and to conquer hell and death. We have that power. So in my reading of Scriptures, that's the way I read the life of Yeshua. There are other people who tend to get into arguments over what things actually happened and what things, if anything, didn't happen and things of that nature. I try to stay out of conversations like that because I think when we get involved with things like that, I think we miss the essence of the teachings. When an African tells a story, they're not so much interested in whether the exact events of the story unfolded exactly the way it was said. They're interested in the deeper and in the higher lessons to be learned from the story. So that's kind of where I am. I think there was an actual historical person by that name, but I think there's been a lot of mythology surrounding the telling of his story.
Okay. Let's go to caller. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Yeah, this is Renee again. I'm sorry. I was on my cell phone and I got a dropped call.
Okay. You had one other question?
Right. Yes,
okay.
I did. To the guest, do you believe that there actually was a person in Yeshua, and do you believe that he really was conceived of a virgin mother, and the mother was Yeshua was the Son of God, and do you believe in all that magic, or is that an allegory? All the different things that's supposed to have happened in the Bible.
Oh, I think
thank you, Renee.
When the call dropped, you missed the last part of what I said. I said I do believe that there was actually a person of Yeshua, but I believe there's a great deal of mythology surrounding it. When you talk about the virgin birth and things of that nature, there is a lot of mythology and allegory, I believe, surrounding that as well. John Henry Clark once again tells us when in traditional societies, when they talked about virgin births and things of that nature, and that is not a new story, that comes out of Africa as well, that they're referring to a level of spiritual purity, not whether or not this woman, was sexually active and things of that nature. When we talk about, Yeshua as the Son of God, let me put it in these terms. Who was Yeshua? I believe was a person who was filled with the fullness of the Spirit of the Most High. Again, a divine creation who took material, physical manifestation and was filled with the fullness of the manifestation of the Spirit of God. But I would add to that, who are you? Who am I? Who are we? We are divine spirits who have the fullness of the Spirit of the Most High as well. So in other words, for me, the only separation is a separation in consciousness. Again, as I read the Scriptures, everything that I read about him, he's telling us to come up to the same level that he was at. In the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 30, he says, I and the Father are one. I don't believe he was just saying that about himself. I believe that's something that all of us should be able to say, that I and the Most High are one. There is no separation. I think the ultimate lie, the ultimate deception is that if there's a separation between us and the Most High, between us and the Creator. And I think that's where we have to really begin to understand that there is no separation.
Before we take a break, and because I want to talk about some of those similarities, the 25 similarities that you talked about earlier, because I think that people need to hear some of these things. Brother Reg, Brother Ralph, before we take a break, jump on in here. Boy, the call has been kind of taking things off the hook there, but I know y'all got some things you want to throw in. Brother Reg?
Yeah, I'm here. It's Ralph. I'll let Ralph go.
Ralph? Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I'm here,
all right.
Brother Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
I was waiting for Brother Reg to take, to ask this question, but I sort of understood where the sister Mira was coming from, because I myself, I hear some of those historians, some people that's in the circuit right now saying that they just take the whole Bible and throw it away. I myself can't do that. I can look at the book of Proverbs and look at some things that Brother Akua was talking about in his book and on his DVD, like Proverbs. Those Proverbs actually came from our people. Yeah, they've been tampered with. Yeah, we had the Gutenberg Bible in the 1400s was the first, so-called first printed Bible. But there are certain things in that scripture that are valid truths for me, and I can't let them go, regardless. Mm-hmm. And I've even seen people use different things like from what Dr. Ben, Dr. Henry Clark, and other historians, I've seen them actually take these things and use them as another religion and actually beat up on our brothers and sisters in the Christian faith, in the Islam faith, and everything else. And I myself, I'm saying, like, if it rings true with my spirit, and that's what I get from spirituality, if it rings true for me, then I'm going to have to grab onto it and hold on to it. So you talked about spirituality, you talk about religion. In my opinion, this is just my opinion, religion was used as a tool to control people. Spirituality is something that an individual uses to actually make life better, more fulfilling. Like, we'll take the spiritual principle of honesty. Because, in all these religions, it tells us to be true to ourselves. So honesty is something that we all have to, grasp a hold of, and, really hold on to it. Or another principle called humility. That means that I have enough knowledge about myself to know my strengths, my weaknesses, or so forth. So I believe in spirituality more than I do man-made religion. But I understood where that sister was coming from, because that has often been a turn-off point for me. Because, and I have friends that will say, oh, we don't know what we can do together. But I say, wait a minute. I have enough humility about myself to know I cannot create a tree. I cannot create grass. I cannot create a world. I cannot create a uniform. So since I have that much humility about myself, I understand that there is some higher force out there that I have to be in subjection to. So, no, Brother Akua, I read your publication. I saw the way you were bringing out Proverbs and ancient texts. And, I cannot throw away that scripture. Because, you talked about the New Testament also. And, I think it's in John, the 14th chapter. And it says, those works I do, you may do also. But religion has our people thinking we can't do it. We're nothing. We're full of sin. We're garbage. But here's a being that tapped into that power, telling his followers and his students, the works I do, you may do also. So that religious thinking have them thinking less of themselves, like they're no good, they're rotten, and they have to believe in this majestical image that we see in these pictures in these buildings. And I just thank the Almighty or my ancestors for instilling in me something that says something's wrong with that kind of thinking. So, I'm just, that I felt that sister where she was coming from, Amir. And, I really felt her because that's a turnoff for me also. How can you be like I said, it all comes from humility. Now, if you show me that you could go out there and you can make a tree grow, you can plant, you can make grass, you can create a duck or some type of animal, then maybe I'll say like, okay, maybe, but until that point, there's something greater than I am that made day and night. So, and that's just where I'm at, my brother.
Absolutely. I appreciate your insights, and I pretty much, feel the same way. All of the steps and elements of traditional African initiation, I can find it in the scriptures, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, in the Gospels and so forth. And I think what it boils down to for me is when you mention all the other scholars who have presented their historical findings and cultural interpretations and things of that nature, at the end of the day, it becomes a matter of, well, what do you believe? And what do you believe enough that you're going to practice it? And then beyond belief, what is it that's beyond belief that you know? The elders in the church used to say, I know that I know that I know that I know. So what is it that you know and are willing to stand on and build your life on? And I think that's what it boils down to. So, yeah, you may listen to my opinion or you may listen to someone else's opinion, but at the end of the day, you got to take all of that data, all of that research, and come to your own conclusions and find out what you're here for and what we're here for. But the best thing that I've discovered for me, in terms of drawing other people, is to the best of your ability to live what you say you believe. Because I've had people that don't agree with me theologically. They don't believe in the teachings that I espouse. But those very same people will be like, well, there's something about his walk. There's something about the way he's living his life. And believe me, I'm not by any means perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But what I'm suggesting is that if we walk in the light and we radiate the light of the Most High, I think that speaks louder than any tag or any title that we can place on what tradition we're studying or any of those types of things. And I flow in a number of different diverse settings. I have friends and acquaintances of all different faith backgrounds. And the way that I, deal with people is based on the ethic of the love that they share and the values and the principles that they live their life on. That's what it boils down to for me. So I definitely appreciate your insights, brother.
And Brother Akua, I wanted to say this also. Every time I do talk to someone from another faith, or maybe they claim to be agnostic or whatever, what I say to them, the thing that the guideline that I always try to use is, and it's a biblical principle and it's an African principle, treat other people the way you want to be treated. That is a God. If we could just hold on to that, it would be much more unity amongst us. If we would treat our brothers and sisters like we want to be treated, and I'm not saying practice perfection, but I'm saying at least try to practice that. And we got half the battle won just with that one principle right there.
Sure, absolutely. That's what it boils down to. It's funny because when they asked Yeshua, which of the laws was most important, and in the Hebrew tradition there were some 600, and I believe it was over 600 Mosaic or Levitical laws that the people were to live by. And the leaders of the day were using these laws really to incarcerate the minds of the people, to make them feel that they could never live up to anything. And so when they asked him, which of the laws is most important, and he said all of the laws hang on this one law: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your mind, and your soul, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. But now consider, let's go back to our culture and history and how we've been manipulated. We have been taught, trained, and educated to hate ourselves.
True.
So how is it that I can love, if I love my neighbor as myself, but I hate my neighbor, then what am I going to do to my neighbor? So I agree with what you're saying. It's really going to boil down to, really doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. If we could just get that one right there, I think we'd be all right.
Caller, what's your name and where you calling from?
This is Brother Makalisi. I'm calling from Amelia, Virginia.
How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great, no less than blessed. How about you?
Great. You have a question for Brother Akua?
Well, I just want to say I listened to the program last week with Brother Akua, and I thought it was a really outstanding program, and I'm glad you brought him back. I was really interested in hearing what he had to say tonight. I thought I was going to be hair going to be raising up on the back of my neck, because I'm a student of the Kemetic tradition, and in fact started a spiritual community in Oakland, California, the Wolsey community of the Sacred African Way. 30 some years ago. But I recently moved to Virginia about 7 years ago, and I miss Wolsey terribly, although I do interact and communicate with the people on an ongoing basis. But I just thoroughly, my heart is touched and filled with responses with the information you've been giving, same kind of information we've studied. And those who say they heard the scholars saying there's no God, I don't know what scholars they heard, or they took it out of context. They didn't hear it when perhaps he or she was taking it out of the European perspective and seeking to help people understand an African perspective. But as you explained to folks about the Ka and the Karaf and Christ, where that came from, it's a challenge for us. It's an invitation that to be one with Most High, the powers that the Most High has used to bring the universe into being. The measure that has been given to us, and we need to cultivate to its fullest. And I don't know if you're familiar with a passage from Chike Akua's book, 2010. It's a novel, but it has a really profound statement there about the spirituality, where it says, there's a great force in the world, a force that's spiritual and able to shape the physical universe, but that force is not something cut off from us, not something separate from ourselves. It's an energy in us, stronger than our working, breathing, thinking together as one people, weakest when we are scattered, confused, broken into individual, unconnected fragments. So let me not take up more time. I just am thoroughly enjoying the presentation, your response, the information you're giving. And I'm going to have to get your book, as well as some other books on the educational side, because we have to teach our children.
Well, keep listening, brother, because we're going to give out the information on how you can get the DVDs and books.
Oh, I got that last week.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
As a matter of fact, let me give that information now. And
go ahead, brother.
We had a glitch with our website last week, so let me give you the best place to get the book. You can go to blackbusinessnetwork.com. Go to blackbusinessnetwork.com /AKUA. blackbusinessnetwork.com. And on the Black Business Network, you can search their store, and they have all sorts of black-made products. It's a wonderful distribution site, and I've given them permission to distribute my products, and they do an outstanding job of it. So again, that's blackbusinessnetwork.com. When you go on the site, you can search the store, but when you're ready to purchase, you will create a free login in order to process the purchase. But they have all of my DVDs, all of my books, and everything there. So again, blackbusinessnetwork.com. And I really appreciate your comment, brother. The Wosei Church, I believe, is in Oakland, California. They had a school, and they ordered some of my books, in particular, Within. And I had been meaning to reconnect with them because I was out on the West Coast last month. So I need to reconnect with them and see about the possibility of maybe doing something out there. But what you read from Mike Wayama was right on point, brother. It was right on point. And it really harmonizes with everything that I've been speaking of.
I want to thank you.
As you were speaking last week, Elliott, that's our school there, we'll say. Outstanding school. We started with a handful of 5 students, and that was almost 30 years ago. Now we have over 100 students, preschool through 8th grade, and we have a waiting list for every class. So we're wrestling with how to find a larger facility to accommodate those students, but doing an outstanding job with students who, before they came to Elliott Day with that African family orientation, the parents were saying, well, my kids, I have a hard time getting them to go to school. Man, they come to Elliott Day, they don't want to go home.
Yes, sir.
Oh, it's what that spirit can do. Whew, my goodness, if we accept that transformation, allow ourselves to come out of the box that Europeans have imposed on us in all ways, spiritually, educationally, there's no limit to what we can do.
Brother, thank you for your call, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you.
We kind of went past time. We're
need to hear, 'cause people, the answer to your prayers are here. Sister Mary,
welcome back to Time for an Awakening. We're joined in conversation this evening with Master Teacher, Brother Chike Akua. The topic, the African origin of our faith. And let's get right back to the conversation. Brother Reg?
Yeah, to Brother Akua, I have a few questions, but I like all the information that you're giving back as far as responses to the questions the listeners are asking, also what we're asking you. My first question is, I want your take. I think one of the major fundamental problems when you're dealing with major religions is the concept and the conceptualization of looking outside yourself more than inside yourself. And I just wanted your thoughts on that. And then I have a follow-up question on after that.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that is a big challenge that we have to overcome. And when you've been trained to do that, to look outside of yourself for the answer to your prayers and to a power, then that causes problems because you don't have a tendency to tap into your personal power. And what I mean by that is that we are in the Most High, and the Most High is within us. And so if we seek the Most High within ourselves, we would find the answers, I believe, many of the answers that we're looking for. But then when you add to that the fact that there were artistic and cultural representations of the Most High as a European person, then we began to think that the European was God. Even if we didn't think that consciously, we began to act it out subconsciously.
Okay.
And so Europeans notwithstanding, we can even take them out of the equation, because I believe even what we have to overcome in terms of the things that they've put in place, I believe is the part of the challenge of us rising into our divinity. And the crossroads is where we take our humanity. I believe the greatest expression of our humanity is our divinity. But that's not arrived at by just going through life, going along to get along. There has to be some devotion, some discipline, some dedication to seeking these deeper and higher divine truths.
Okay, and my next question, my follow-up question is, I was listening to what Ralph was stating, some of his comments in reference to the sister's call about believing in non-belief in a higher power, non-belief in God, and belief in God. I want your thoughts on the biggest thing when you're dealing with God, the God concept, or if you want to say the Most High, whatever you want to call the entity that's created you, if you believe that, is that you're reconciling something that's invisible that no one has seen. I just want your thoughts about that, the invisibility of the Creator.
Well, for me, the most compelling reality is the unseen reality. And again, the society that we live in, which in many cases is dominated by a non-African worldview, poses the seen reality as the only essential reality. So that's very problematic, because in traditional African culture and spirituality, we gave deference to the unseen. And not only did we give deference to the unseen, because we understood how powerful the unseen forces were, it was a part of our education and spiritual systems that it cultivated the opening and the awakening of the Ujat, or the third eye, so that we could see what could not be seen with the physical eyes. I hope this is making some sense.
It is.
But it was a part of our original systems of education and spirituality to develop inner vision. But now in this society, we live in a sense of relying solely on the five senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, and so forth, not understanding that there are a range of senses beyond the five physical senses that tap us in and tune us into the higher dimensions. But everything that we see in the physical world oftentimes drags us down to the lower or base aspects of our being, rather than calling us up to the higher and highest aspects of our being. And by the way, one of our most famous monuments speaks to this dynamic, and that is the Hurricane, also known as the Great Sphinx. But of course, we always prefer to use the original African term, which is Hurricane, which means Heru, on the horizon. You have the head of a human being and the body of an animal. You have the head of a human, the body of a lion. The head of the human represents your higher self, or your God self. The body of the lion represents your lower self, or your animalistic instincts. Now, the animalistic instincts are not necessarily evil. They serve a purpose. There's a drive that we all should have. But you will notice that in the Hurricane, the body of the lion is not raised up ready to attack. It is laying down in submission to the higher self, represented by the head of the human. So what that tells us is the head of the human is looking up at an angle. It's looking up. Well, what's it looking at? It's looking at the rising sun. And the sun was the representation of the Most High, which represents light and spiritual wisdom. So when we keep our eyes on the Most High, which represents the rising of that light or inner wisdom within us, then we will be able to bring into command our higher self and bring our lower self into complete submission. It's that understanding that I think will lead us to that cross consciousness, or the ability to tap into the powers of the Most High.
Brother Akua, you talked, I was checking out some of the information that's on YouTube in reference to some of your lectures dealing with this particular subject. And on one of them, you talked about the ancient names of the lands that we knew of during biblical periods. You mentioned Kemet and what it meant. You mentioned Kebalan and what it meant. And you mentioned Taneta, if I'm pronouncing it right. And the translation was the land of God.
Right.
The reason I'm mentioning that, because I really want you to get to the some of the ancient African scriptures and how they're predated by other spiritual writings. But the reason I'm asking you that is this. We see that the first 5 books of the Bible, which is called the first 5 books of Moses, is attributed to Moses writing them. But we noticed that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, came from that land that was called Tanetta, the land of God, if I'm not mistaken. I want you to correct me if I'm wrong.
As far as I know, Jethro was one of the Midianites.
Yes.
But one of the things that we should be clear on is that all of the people of that ancient world were people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Black people.
Yes.
And so that's the first thing we should understand. Mm-hmm. The second thing, I think, the good as well as those that strayed from the path. These were black people or people of color. The Bible says in the book of Acts that Moses was learned in all of the ways of the Egyptians and mighty in word and in deed.
Yes.
So, yes, those first 5 books of the Bible are called the books of Moses, but biblical scholars have now kind of agreed that there were several writers, not just one writer, while they have been attributed to Moses, or maybe could have been written under his direction or leadership. But we're not written by him. But the key is, we also know that many of those rituals and things coming out of there can be seen in earlier situations of African spirituality. Whenever we're looking at the conception of heaven, the soul of man going to heaven, the soul of man sitting on the throne beside God, the heavenly blessed eating from the tree of life, God molding man from clay, God breathing the breath of life into man's nostrils, the concept of creation through the spoken word, moral concepts of good and evil, judgment upon the end of his life. All of those things, all of those essential elements come out of traditional African spirituality in the Nile Valley of Africa. They make their way into the Bible, they make their way into the Quran, but they have their genesis in Africa. Even in the book of Genesis, it tells us in the 2nd chapter about the rivers coming out of the Garden of Eden. You have the Gihon and the Pishon. Well, if you didn't know the history, you would know that those words, Gihon and Pishon, are referring to the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and that it says that it compasses the whole land of Cush or Ethiopia. So it's telling us that the Garden of Eden was situated right in that area. So there's so many different truths that are very powerful about our history and culture that we find in the Scripture, but that have been glossed over, or again, because of the lenses that we've been given to read with, we don't even see it when we read it. So these are just a few of the things that I think are important to know.
You know, the reason I mentioned about Aaron, the biblical Aaron in relation to Moses, is because just from me studying, I see that the men that you talk about during that period was more in tune with spirituality than religion at all. We see that Aaron, who wasn't a biblical Hebrew, told Moses about the priesthood and about setting up a priesthood. So we can see here evidence of what you're saying is that these biblical truths, or even Moses' understanding, came from a person that wasn't considered a Hebrew, but was spiritually in tune with the Almighty.
Right.
Okay.
And, again, looking at the different titles that we give ourselves, for me it all boils down to this, is God, is the Most High a Hebrew, is the Most High a Christian, is the Most High a Muslim or traditional African spiritualist? And the answer to that would be no. And for people who insist that, we have to be of a certain path, like for those that would say, you have to be a Christian and so forth. Well, my question is Jesus a Christian then? Jesus wasn't a Christian. Okay? Was Jesus in heaven? I'm using the logic that, some people use. He's
Mm-hmm.
in heaven. Of course he's in heaven. Okay, well, he's in heaven and he's not a Christian. You see what I'm saying? So there's just some basic questions that we can ask. Again, I don't think the tags and the titles are the most important thing. It's essentially the spiritual substance that we bring to our daily walk. And the spiritual substance that we bring to our daily walk is what is going to compel other people to become more serious about their daily walk. And I think for those of us like myself who are very critical of religion and so forth, what it all boils down to is, okay, now that we have critiqued other religions and the evil and things other people are doing, here's what it boils down to is, what are we going to do?
Okay.
Because if we don't rise up into our godliness and radiate the divine energy that we say we're supposed to have, then what we're saying is that those forces of evil are more powerful than the God in us. And so we can't leave our discussion at a critique of what other people have done to us and the evil that's out there. We got to take it to a whole nother level and go beyond critique to correction and say, okay, now that we know that, we're rising into our consciousness of our divinity, and we're going to transform all that.
You talked earlier about the evidence of African initiation rituals that are in the Bible, and it's three that I want you to expound on from your understanding. Our people, I think we do things subconsciously because of the spirituality, but we don't realize where it came from. The idea of raising hands when either in prayer or celebrating the Almighty, or even in worship.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from? And I got two more for you in reference to that.
Well, we can take you back to some of the temples in Kemet, in Egypt, and we can show you carved into the walls of the temple the symbol of the Ka, the spirit, and it's symbolized by two raised hands. Now, I want you to think about what that symbolizes, because when we go into church and people really begin to feel the presence of the Most High and the holy movement of the sacred spirit, people will raise their hands and wave their hands and so forth. And it becomes, in a sense, an act of surrender, okay? In addition, if you have a small child, like a toddler, a 2-year-old, who wants to be lifted up, what will they do? They will raise their hands to you in order for you to lift them up. What is a song in the church? We sing, Lord, I lift your name on high. And we raise our hands in a sense. It's almost like an automatic biological response to wanting the Most High to lift us up. When a person has a joyful experience, or they win a game, they make a touchdown, they score, a bucket in basketball or something, a lot of times they will lift their hands. It's an automatic response of joy and of celebration. And I think what that represents is that we're lifting our hands to the Most High. So I think it's significant that was something that goes as far back as ancient Kemet, thousands and thousands of years ago, to represent that. And the fact that we still do that in church today, the fact that we still do that even whether we're in a church building or not, is very significant as well to me.
I agree. We see in the scriptures that it talks about men being anointed with oil. I think Christ was anointed. Several. You see it being mentioned with prophets and others, even up until the time of Christ, him being anointed with an oil. That anointing with oil is another definite sign that came from our people prior to the scriptures. Am I right?
Absolutely. Very, very prominent throughout the Nile Valley. Again, I can take you to several of the different temples and show you kings being anointed, other noblemen and women being anointed, and so forth. So, what's interesting is I know when I was growing up and coming up in church, in reading the scriptures and in the teachings that we were given, it was almost the way that it was presented was this is the only way that everything that you're reading and seeing is unique only to this people and only to this religion. And then, you know, you go and you do some more research and you find out, well, wait a minute, all these things existed long before the people in the biblical scriptures. And once you begin to realize that, you realize that many of these things are more universal than they are particular. So, yes, anointing is not anything new. It's not anything that other people weren't doing. I guess you might say it's the spirit in which people are anointing and what they're being anointed for. And so we see the same spiritual types of anointing in the Nile Valley of Africa.
And also, before you go into those comparisons of Scripture, the last one I wanted to mention was because we see that John did it, and they characterize him as John the Baptist. But the water immersion for purification is clear evidence also, am I right, that these things predated the Bible?
Absolutely. If I were to take you to the temple of Amun-Ra, which is inside of, I believe it's the Pettisut temple in Kemet, you will see a reflecting pool, which was used for baptizing people.
Okay.
So, yeah, again, all of these rituals that we read of in the Bible, none of them are new. And it's okay. As a matter of fact, the Bible itself says in Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. So It should not be disturbing. It should not be, as a matter of fact, as I begin to reflect on what I hope people take from this conversation, because I've had people come up to me after, you know, I'll do one of my African Origins of Our Faith presentations, and they'll say, well, you know, I just joined this church, or I just accepted Christ into my life, and now I don't know what to do based on, you know, what you just said. Well, and my response to that is, well, all of the elements of what you accepted are still true. The element that you may have fallen short of the glory of God because you involved yourself in things that were ungodly and you're repenting for that, that's fine. You know, the fact that you're now committing your life to the Most High, that's wonderful. The fact that you're seeking to have the covering of the anointing of the Holy Spirit to guide you in everything, that's excellent. So what you did is a wonderful thing. It marks a turning point in the transition in your life. What I'm sharing from a historical and spiritual perspective is let the wisdom and the spiritual traditions of our ancestors continue to guide you in that process. And understand that there's a distinct difference between what we were given on the plantation in terms of Christianity and what the original and essential teachings are. That's all I'm suggesting.
Okay.
So for people of a particular religion, I would say go deeply into your tradition and practice it. Go deeply into your tradition and live it. And at the end of the day, that's all I'm attempting to do too, brother.
Brother Akua, look into open up some of our minds, so to speak, because a lot of these things that you're going to talk about, I'm unfamiliar with. But give us some examples of ancient African scriptures that predate the biblical scriptures. And you talked about 25 of them. Listen, you can do all 25 if you choose to. But, I think our people need to hear these. I really think our people need to hear these things because subconsciously, and I'm dealing with that part of it, our people really don't believe that any of these righteous spiritualities came from our people. Subconsciously, it's a large segment of our people that really believe that these things stem from Europeans, and we're just Gentiles grafted in. So I think they really need to hear some of these examples that you're about to give.
Sure, and I'll try to deal with some of the scriptures, a few that may sound familiar. In the book of Psalms, chapter 14, verse 1, it says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." In the book of Anshishanki, which predates the book of Psalms about 1,000 years, it says, "Although the way of God is before all people, the fool cannot find it." So there you hear a similar sentiment. Again, Psalms 14:1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. The book of Anshishanti, although the way of God is before all people, the fool cannot find it. Okay? Let me give you another example. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, it says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. In the teachings of Ptahhotep, he says, follow your heart as long as you live. Again, in Proverbs it says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. Ptahhotep says, follow your heart as long as you live. In Proverbs chapter 6, verse 27, it says, can a man take fire into his bosom and not be burned? In the book of Pebor, it says, when a fool lights a fire, he goes too close to it and gets burnt. Again, Proverbs 6:27, can a man take fire into his bosom and not be burned? The book of Pebor, when a fool lights a fire, he goes too close to it and gets burnt. Here's another one. This one should sound very familiar to people. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, train a child up in the way he should go, and when he is older, he will not depart from it. Again, from the teachings of Ptahhotep, if you are parents of worth and wisdom, train your children so that they will be pleasing to God. Again, Proverbs 22:6, train a child up in the way he should go. When he is older, he will not depart from it. The teachings of Ptahhotep, if you are parents of worth and wisdom, train your children so that they will be pleasing to God. So those are just a few examples, and I'd like to leave you with a quote from J. Rogers, where he says, our moral heritage derives from a wider human past, enormously older than the Hebrews, and it has come to us rather through the Hebrews than from them. Can
you repeat that for us?
Our moral heritage derives from a wider human past, enormously older than the Hebrews, and it has come to us rather through the Hebrews.
I'll leave that up to you, brother. But as you dry your face and contemplate your next move, keep in mind the devils love doubt. And if you don't know how to be a man, they will show you how. It's wartime.
Welcome back to Time for an Awakening, and we're joined in conversation tonight with author and African-centered master teacher, Brother Chike Akua. Tonight was part 2 of our discussion from last week, based on his DVDs and the book, The African Origin of Our Faith. Brother Akua, we're coming down to the end of the program, but I want you to give a statement on this. We see that you're working on several fronts, trying to reach our children, to help our children with education, establishing curriculums and things of that nature, and also on the front we're talking about this evening. Do you feel in your heart there is, and I know kind of what your answer is going to be, where's the responsibility to some of our spiritual leaders in the religious fronts to help our people? Do they have an obligation, if they don't know these things you're talking about, to at least educate themselves? Is there an obligation there? Because they're leading people, and people follow them as individuals, not necessarily what they're saying. Our people follow individuals. Is there a responsibility for them to help our people in these respects that you're talking about this evening?
Well, yeah, I think it's very clear that they have a responsibility to teach truth and to teach an authentic way that people can access the power of the Most High within themselves. And we see that there are all kinds of things going on out there that are not doing that. Personally, I used to be one who was deeply and heavily critical of such ministries. I've tried to pull back a little bit from my critique and criticism of ministries like that and attempt to be what I feel we are being called to be, rather than giving all of my energy to the critique. And so that's what I would like to focus on, because anytime you turn over your personal power to a leader, it better be a leader who's leading you in the right direction. And if they're leading you in the right direction, they should be helping you to tap into your personal power. And I think that's what it boils down to. So are there some leaders out there who are leading people in the wrong direction? I think so. But also when we consider that all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose, then there's some spiritual lessons to be learned if you were ever a part of one of those ministries. And you've got to do some deep soul searching and determine where you can best serve people who are also on the same path as you.
Brother Reggie, Brother Ralph, anything you want to kind of wind up with this evening with Brother Akua?
No, I would have liked to go over those 42 declarations, but listen. You know what? If Brother Akua got to do a little more, we got time. If he has time, Brother Akua.
Sure.
Go ahead, Ralph. No, it was just something that I was reading in the publication, The African Origins of Our Faith, and he calls them you were asking earlier, Elliott, I believe, it's not on these so-called leaders. It's up to the individual. We have the tools necessary to come out from these institutions. As a matter of fact, I'll be honest with you. I used to beat up on people like Creflo Dollar, because you can see where he's making merchandise out of his followers. But a lot of those people that are following that man knows what he's doing, and that's their choice. But you have something called the 42 Declarations. Some people call them the negative confessions, the 42 negative confessions. I don't see nothing negative about them. And we have the tools necessary to come out from among these things. But I used to give a lot of, and I'm like you, Brother Akua, I used to give a lot of strength and energy trying to free our people out of those kind of situations. But then I was losing myself trying to help them. So the only thing I could do is just stay on my path and actually keep them in prayer or whatever, because a lot of those folks, even though they know they're being used and misled, they choose that. And there's nothing me or you can do about that but to continue on our path and let them continue on theirs, because I was on that path at one time. I saw what was going on. So I can only go by my own experience. I talk to other members of that of a particular religion and let them know about these bondage rules that they put on our people, as far as giving 10% of your gross income when you don't even have enough to pay your light bill. And these men are riding around in luxurious automobiles. Some have jets, and they constantly beat their followers over the head for money. And I'm going to be honest with you, the turning point for me was I knew, and I was young, I was early 30s. I knew something was wrong. As a matter of fact, all of us knew something was wrong in that institution. But when I started seeing these institutions start having things like conferences, and they all belong, it was like a group of black churches belonged to what they called a conference. Then they had a conference head. The leaders of these black churches was always a white guy that would come there, that would get the money out of these black churches. And that was the defining, that was the moment for me when I seen all this was a scam. It was a pyramid scheme. And so you have these black guys that are front men over these congregations grabbing this money, and they would tithe it into their conference, or I forget the correct word for it. But the head of these was a little white man, and that was his spiritual daddy. And I could not belong to anything like that. You know what I mean? And it was painful breaking away from it because I was leaving family and friends and everything. But you know what? We're a lot of times when we're growing, it is painful. We got to give up things that we really don't want to give up. And I had to give that up. So I recognized, let me continue doing what I have to do. Let me stay on the path that is out in front of me. And try not to hurt people that are already hurt anyway. Most of them are hurt looking for answers. And so try not to hurt those that are already hurt. Because I was just listening to Elliott about these leaders. Oh, yeah, they're nothing but bona fide criminals, a lot of them. I'm going to call it like I see it. But,
brother, in closing, I would like to shift to what I consider to be the empowering alternative. Because I think at the end of the day, there's nothing that we can do about them other than cultivating ourselves and others around us who are willing. And so I want to leave you with a few scriptures that speak to the direction that I'm prayerful and hopeful that the listeners will go in. Okay. Yeshua says in the book of Luke, chapter 17, verse 21, "Behold, the kingdom of heaven is within you." One of you talked about the fallacies and the problem of looking outside of yourself for salvation. He's saying right here, behold, the kingdom of heaven is within you. He goes on to say in John chapter 3, verse 3, "Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." And so we have to die to the ways of the world in order for the ujat, or the third eye, to be opened and awakened so that you can see the kingdom of the Most High. In another place, he says, you are all God's children of the Most High God. And then I'll leave you with this last thing, and it's one of my favorite prayers from the book of Coming Forth by Day, from the Pert Imheru, coming out of the Nile Valley of Africa. And this really speaks to what I believe we can be and should be. It says, "May I rise like a living God and give forth light like the divine powers that are in heaven. May I ascend in the presence of the beneficent one, and may I assume whatever form I want in whatever place my spirit wishes to be." For the past couple of hours, my spirit has wished to be with you wonderful brothers and those that are listening. And my prayer is that we will all go deep within ourselves to behold the kingdom of heaven that is within us, and that we'll rise up and radiate that light to others and share that love and light so that we can bring transformation to a world that is in need of deep healing.
Before we leave tonight, Brother Akua, I want you to give out any information again, all the Twitter handles, the Facebook, anything you want to give out. And plus, you'll be here in Philadelphia, I think you said in a couple of weeks?
Yes. Well, again, if you're interested in getting a copy of the African Origins of Our Faith, which includes the book, the DVD, and the CD, you can go to blackbusinessnetwork.com. Again, that's blackbusinessnetwork.com. For those of you that enjoyed the conversation, if you're interested in following me on Facebook, you can hit me up there. My first name is spelled Chike, C-H-I-K-E. Last name Akua, A-K-U-A. I will be in Philly at the end of May and the beginning of June. I'm going to be featured in a new documentary called The Journey of the Songhai People. And this documentary has won a number of awards at several black film festivals this past year by a wonderful, incredible producer by the name of Brother Bob Lott, and also Ali Salahuddin of the African Genesis Institute. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be gathering on June 1st for a screening of that movie, and then a panel discussion that I will be on after we view the screening of the movie. So I'm really excited about returning to Philly for that. And I'll definitely be getting you all some more information about that. But for the listeners, just go ahead and mark your calendar for Sunday, June 1st in Philly.
Now, we'll be looking forward to you coming on and kind of billboarding things before you get here. And a question, too, because the people might be interested, some of our Philly listeners, will you have your DVDs and books there at the when you're here?
Absolutely. And
Good.
I'll have copies of the African Origins of Our Faith. In addition, we're working on the possibility of me doing a lecture on the majesty of the Moors, the African influence in early Europe, because next summer, 2015, not this summer, but summer of 2015, I'm leading a Majesty of the Moors on tour, study tour, to Morocco, Spain, and Senegal. So we'll be dealing with that in Philly as well. We may be doing a lecture. Like I said, I'm waiting to hear if we'll be able to get the venue for that. And I may need to speak with you about that as well, Elliott, with Elliott, to see what we might be able to do.
Great. I'll be looking forward to it. And I'll be reaching out to you in the future. You know, we always want to get updates on what you're doing, where you're going, with the children, and in reference to what we're talking about now. So the door is always open to you.
Well, brother, it's an absolute honor. I tell you, when I read the list of other African scholars who had been on your program before me, I was very humbled to be a part of it. So anytime I can be of service, don't hesitate to call.
We'll be looking forward to it, and I want to thank you for being with us this evening.
Yes, sir. Peace and blessings.
Brother Reg, Brother Al?
Yes, sir.
Interesting discussion this evening with Brother Akua. I mean, he raised some issues that a lot of people need to take a close look at. I mean, you know, he talked about some of the other folks that we've had on, and you know this better than anybody, Ralph and Reg, that a lot of the scholars have different approaches to how they express this subject matter. And some folks can make it a little more plainer than others. And I really like the plainness of how Brother Akua expressed his sentiments towards his work.